Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Walsh. I'll be the moderator today and have the good fortune to have spent some time with some of our friends that you're going to hear a lot about here very shortly. We think this is one of the great programs that we are going to be doing at the university, and this Crossroads is going to become, I think, something that we do for a long period of time, and you're going to see some extraordinary, interesting people come in and be able to talk about interesting things. So we're looking forward to it. Before we begin, though, I'm going to ask President Alexander Cartwright to come out and say a few words to everybody. So please welcome President Cartwright.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick. Good afternoon and welcome to our inaugural Crossroads event held in partnership with Dr. Phillips Charities. Yes. The Crossroads series will explore the intersection of business and philanthropy, something UCF knows a lot about because it is at the heart of our story. What we know is that the power of philanthropy that comes from the wealth generated by entrepreneurship is transformational. The university has experienced that time and time again, most notably with the $40 million gift received last summer from McKinsey Scott and Dan Jewett. UCF itself is a living example of how partnership and the entrepreneurial spirit can drive success and improve the lives of individuals, communities, and even those around the world. The foundation of UCF has always been about partnership. The Orlando community, working together in the late 1950s and early 60s, created what we now know today as UCF. Community leaders with vision and foresight saw the immense value of having a university right here in Central Florida. 89 founding donors invested in this vision, and some even donated the land on which the university's main campus currently sits. Just 58 years later, UCF is one of the largest metropolitan research universities in the country with over 334,000 alumni. In the early 2000s, Harris Rosen's generosity and partnership led to a campus at UCF's Rosen College of Hospitality Management, now the #1 hospitality program in the country and #2 in the world. And yes. And just 6 years ago, when UCF was charged with raising $20 million in 6 months to unlock state funding for the creation of UCF Downtown, Dr. Phillips Charities showed leadership and vision, investing in the impact the downtown campus would create. Dr. Phillips Charities' gift toward UCF Downtown was indeed transformational, making the campus possible. Today, on the campus, just a mile from here, stands the Dr. Phillips Academic Commons, a state-of-the-art educational facility on the campus we share with Valencia College. Now, 2 years after UCF Downtown opened, thousands of students, faculty, and staff live, work, and learn in the heart of our city. Dr. Phillips Charities and UCF have provided an academic home and new opportunities for hardworking students who want to earn success, particularly for those in some of our region's most economically disadvantaged areas. The relationship between UCF and Dr. Phillips Charities is a lasting one. Their first gift to UCF was made in 1968, the year we held our very first classes. We've been partners in impact ever since. There is a tremendous future ahead for UCF as we strive to provide this world-class city with the world-class university it needs and deserves. We will become the world's leading metropolitan public research university. We will educate and graduate students who will be the thinkers, doers, creators, discoverers, and healers of our society as we move forward. The research and creative works of our faculty will lead to new solutions for our world's most serious challenges. But we will not do it alone. Our partners, friends, and supporters throughout the state and nation will help make it possible. And I am thankful to know Dr. Phillips Charities is among them. Since 1954, Dr. Phillips Charities has contributed more than $200 million to our region, supporting education, healthcare, arts and culture, children, and social services. Everyone who lives and works in Central Florida is better off thanks to the legacy of Dr. Phillips. Today, we are honoring an enduring partnership with the kickoff of this Crossroads Lecture Series, the first of what will be an annual celebration of how business and philanthropy can unite in the entrepreneurial spirit to make the world a better place. And so, before we get to today's conversation with Clarence Otis, I have the pleasure of announcing next year's Crossroads Series speaker. In 2022, we will host Jonathan Tisch. Jonathan Tisch is co-chairman of the board of the Lowe's Corporation, one of the largest diversified financial holding companies in the US. He is also chairman and CEO of its subsidiary, Lowe's Hotels and Company. Not only an incredibly successful corporate leader, he is a pioneer in corporate citizenship and social responsibility. You won't want to miss it, so mark your calendars for November 15th, 2022, right here at the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts. Now, I'd like to invite to the podium Ken Robinson, President and CEO of Dr. Phillips Charities. And Ken, yes. And Ken, on behalf of the students, faculty, and staff of the University of Central Florida, I thank you for your belief and your trust that you have put in us. Together, we've watched UCF, Orlando, and Central Florida grow to become beacons of innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic progress. Without question, Dr. Phillips Charities played a vital role in this success, and we continue to be extremely grateful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, President Cartwright. That's a very generous introduction. And I mentioned earlier that if you look at our grant making, you can tie it back to the Phillips family in UCF and FTU when Rick and I first went there. So it goes back a long ways, and we're very proud of the relationship we have. We've been there in the past, we're there today, and we'll be there in the future with UCF as you continue to grow. Special thanks to Clarence Otis for joining us as the inaugural speaker for the Crossroads Series. I truly couldn't think of a person that better epitomizes what we're trying to get across, what we're trying to convey with this series. Dr. Cartwright, thank you for your commitment to UCF, to this speaker series. And Rick, thank you for coming and being a moderator for this. Rick, on his own, epitomizes what we're trying to accomplish. He's a great giver in this community and very deep ties to UCF. I think they were referred to as old ties, and that's kind of hurtful sometimes, isn't it? We have two of our board members here with us from Dr. Phillips Charities tonight, John Hillenmeyer and Terry Prather. Thank you. They volunteer their time and give us great input. They give us guidance, governance, and really help us with the grants. And so they're the deep thinkers when it comes to where are the dollars going to go, and do a great job helping us through that. When Dr. Phillips made this commitment of $7.5 million to UCF downtown campus, we did it for a number of reasons. And first and foremost of those was bringing affordable education to the kids in Paramore and downtown Orlando. That was crucial. And their concept of how to bring that and make it affordable with the connection with Valencia brought the cost of education down, I think, close to about 25% or so. And it was already labeled as one of the most affordable and best educations you can get. So to do that, have the innovation and the forethought to do that is tremendous. So now the kids that are sitting in Paramore, they can see an opportunity. They can see a building in front of them. They know that education, higher education, is a solution and an opportunity, and it's right in their own backyard. They can live at home for a year or two, like I did, and then find out you can't do that and go to college. You need to move on and go. But it's a tremendous opportunity. Over the last few years, it really seems like words like capitalism and entrepreneurship have really been a negative connotation when you look at the press. And we hope the Crossroads Speaker Series really starts to inform to that topic a little bit and change some people's perception of it. the entrepreneurs, the business leaders, and capitalists of today really become the great philanthropists of the future. I mean, you just look at how it moves. They invest back in the community. They invest into schools like UCF, Valencia, Orange County Public Schools. They invest into youth programs like the Boys Club here in Central Florida, Boys and Girls Club, and the YMCAs. And they invest in beautiful facilities like this here at the Dr. Phillips Center, which we're very proud to have our name tied to. Entrepreneurs and business leaders are truly the catalyst that makes this happen. And Dr. Phillips, like Clarence Otis, epitomized that spirit. And we're very proud of the heritage that he's left to us and the stewardship and the responsibilities we have to carry this forward. So I hope you all enjoy the speaker series. I hope you enjoy this very first one with Clarence Otis. We're so proud to have him with us. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Alex. This is really a special occasion because you're going to be able to hear from everybody that we've heard from so far, and then with Clarence coming up here next. It's really an honor to have him as our founding and inaugural member of this Crossroads opportunity that Dr. Phillips so generously has been supporting. So if you wouldn't mind, help me welcome Clarence Otis to the stand. Am I working? It wasn't working for a while. They did it on purpose. It was great. So, Clarence, good to see you. Welcome to Crossroads.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get to my notes here so I can ask you a good question. We appreciate taking time out of an already too busy schedule. I know you have a lot on your plate, so we really appreciate you being here for that. But to start, I think we'll ask one of those questions that are the best of the questions, which are, tell us about your background, where you grew up and where you were younger and where you thought you'd be by now.
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, this is a terrific honor. Really a big thank you to UCF and to Dr. Phillips Charities. I came to this community in 1995, and it was an amazing community then, it's even more amazing now. An incredible journey, and two big reasons for that are Dr. Phillips Charities and the University of Central Florida, both of which have grown over that time, but they are the catalyst, I think, for the growth and prosperity that this region has really seen. And thank you, Rick. Rick and I, as many of you know, worked together for a very long time at Darden Restaurants, starting when I came in 95, for 15, 20 years after that. In terms of my background, I grew up in Los Angeles. And so I grew up in South Central Los Angeles in the community of Watts, which is a very small part of South Central, but very well known, mostly because of the urban disturbances that happened there in 1965. And I was in elementary school at that time. And Watts was an interesting community. It was a community that substandard housing, under-resourced in a lot of ways, but also a community that had significant resources, cultural resources. It was the epicenter, in part because of the disturbances of the West Coast part of the Black arts movement. So a lot of nationally renowned Black artists of every type, performing artists, novelists, musicians, coming to the community, extraordinary educators. And so I had the benefit of all of that. And I also had the benefit of my parents. My parents were hardworking people who had come to Los Angeles from the South, from Mississippi. And neither of them had a high school education. They grew up in circumstances where they had to quit and do other things after middle school. But while they were in school, they were both really strong students, and they stressed education. And so education was a big part of my background, my experience, and did well in school. We were encouraged to look past high school into college. A lot of things were happening to open up opportunities in colleges where black kids had not been able to go before. And so I wound up going to college in the East in Massachusetts, a small college in western Massachusetts called Williams College, where I had a wonderful time, enjoyed it, loved being on the East Coast, loved visiting New York, still went back to California for law school at Stanford, but continued to be enamored by the East and wound up going back to New York City to start my working career.
I hope we'll hear more about it, and I hope someday you'll have a chance. It's a very compelling story and a very successful story that it's really amazing. As you went along the path with the encouragements that you had, Clarence, what did you do in particular that got you going? What is it that really made you want to expand out into all the various things that you've done so far? Was there something in particular, or just accumulation of things?
Well, I think it was a number of different things. So again, I really enjoyed school, and reading was a big part of that. And so I read a lot, and although I wasn't exposed physically to much of the world, growing up in Watts, which is very remote in Los Angeles. Most people don't go there. It's about 15 miles south of downtown Los Angeles. There's no real reason to go except the Watts Towers, which is a phenomenal folk art piece there in the community. But reading took me all over the world. And so that was certainly an important factor. But also that all of these people that I mentioned, all of these artists, there were artists that ran the Watts Towers Art Center, the art center that was there, who are now world-renowned, who were not world-renowned at that point, but very strong artists. Coaches, they were investing in me a lot of time and energy, not just me, but a lot of my friends and my sisters. And so I was always cognizant of that investment and their aspirations for us to go out and build lives that mattered to other people.
Did you have any surprises along the way?
I was surprised that I, like living on the East Coast more than the West Coast. That was a surprise.
Y'all remember that. Nobody goes to the West Coast. We're staying right here.
Los Angeles has a lot going for it, weather and all of that. But I just, I really liked New York City. And it was just a lot that spoke to me, even though when I got there, it was going through one of its down periods. And New York is one of those cities that goes up and down, ultimately reinvents itself. And when I got there, they were flirting with bankruptcy. But it's a city that, since that period, which was the mid-'70s, has been, on the upswing with those ups and downs. So I was surprised that, I transformed from a Californian to a New Yorker.
That's a great transition. So I'll tell you a little secret about Clarence. He eats more than anybody I've ever seen. He eats a lot. So in keeping with that, talk for a minute about the hospitality industry, because you came out of finance. Is that why you came? Or tell us why you came into the hospitality, and what should people know about careers in hospitality?
Well, I tell you, I was on Wall Street. I had started as a lawyer, a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, did that for 4 years. I found the things that other people on the projects that I was working on did more exciting than the law. I enjoyed the finance part of it, so I made the transition to investment banking and did that for 14 years. And I had gotten to the point where I was leading a part of a securities firm that's owned by a bank that is now basically J.P. Morgan, and loved it. I enjoyed it. And so the hospitality industry was never, we were foodies like many people that live in Manhattan, but beyond that. And I was recruited to come to Darden when Darden was being spun out of General Mills as treasurer. They had relied on General Mills for treasury services and needed a treasurer, and were looking for someone from the capital markets world. And I thought it was great, big company, even though it was new, and had never really thought about that business. But when I came down, met with the people, thought it was intriguing to be able to work with a broader array of people than you can work with on Wall Street. And so just a diverse group of people. And Darden epitomizes that. Even at the executive levels, you have people that are MBAs from highly selective schools, Kellogg, you name it, working side by side in partnership, running those businesses with people who don't have college degrees. And I thought that that was interesting and would be a learning experience. And so I chose to make the move and really loved the business, every part of it. Again, because you work with just a broad array of people, among many other reasons. And so that was sort of how I got into the hospitality business. And as you know, we at Darden recruit from a lot of different industries. Our marketing folks come from consumer packaged goods companies like the one that we used to be part of, General Mills, and others. And some people make that transition to a company like Darden, some don't. The ones that do, they make it because they understand how central frontline employees are to success, and they embrace that and enjoy it.
It's a little bit of an understatement, just as a background. At one point, we had, over 200,000 employees at Darden that was owned and operated because we didn't franchise for the most part. Clarence was the leader of that as we came out of the spin for many, many years. Talk to some of the younger folks in the audience, though, Clarence, and what advice would you give them if faced with wanting to go work for a hotel or work in a bank or work in a restaurant company?
Yeah. Well, I think my advice to young people is you want to avoid falling into the trap of trying to plan out a career. I think my career is illustrative that it's very difficult to plan 5 years, much less 15. What you really want to do is engage in preparation. And so you want to develop a skill set, a specific functional expertise. You want to develop your leadership skills. And then you need to be flexible and see what opportunities arise and to really take advantage of those opportunities. And so in my case, my foundational skill set at Darden, and everyone had one, was finance. And that was the base, but beyond that, you could develop leadership skills, you could begin to understand the other parts of the operation, and really put yourself in a position where you can think about a broader leadership, a general management position in the company. So I think that's important. I think the other thing to always keep in mind is that every company, every organization that's not a company, hospital, is really a social organization. It is made up of people. There are behavioral norms. There are relationships that go on in there. And so you have to understand that social organization, and you have to understand how to work within that organization, work with people, develop relationships. All of that is critically important.
Being an entrepreneur or anyone in business requires taking calculated risks, and you've taken many of them over the years. Can you think of one that you took a calculated risk, it didn't work out, and what did you learn from it?
I would say from a personal perspective, it would have been back when I was still on Wall Street. And so I was at a firm, and the way Wall Street works, as an investment banker is that you're sort of a person that does the work of putting together a transaction, helping think about the documents and how the cash flows will work and all of that. Ultimately, you then become an account leader where you're really developing the client relationships and bringing in business. And ultimately, if you choose to, you can think about running the organization and building the bank itself as opposed to being a client manager. And so I'd gotten to the point where I was a client manager, experienced at that, having some success, and I wanted to move into running the organization. And this particular bank that I was at just didn't think that that was something I could do. And so, as opposed to leaving, going to another organization that might have seen those possibilities for me, I decided with some other friends that we were going to start our own bank.
You got to love it. I mean, come on.
And it was a mistake because it wasn't the kind of organization that worked for me. And so I really did like the large organizations and the bigger teams and that whole dynamic of how to manage and navigate that and the sort of resources that you have available to deploy against the challenges in front of you, which are very different than an entrepreneur, and where you're sort of bootstrapping and really scraping. And so entrepreneurship is important. Some people have been extraordinarily successful at it, but it's not the route for everyone. And for me, that was a mistake. I mean, we had started to get some traction, but I just didn't enjoy working that way.
How long were you at that? How long was it?
2 years.
2 years? Or
Yep.
2 years, 3 years?
2 years.
Yeah, see, it would probably take me 5 to figure that out. Supporting your community and worthy causes with your time and talent and resource is something I'm very familiar that you've done your whole life. What ignited that passion for you to do that? Because you integrated it right into the business model that we were working.
Well, I think for me, again, it was to get from where I was to sort of the kind of career I started to have took a lot of people. And so a lot of people in that community that I grew up those investments that they made in me, but those continued. I mean, they continued in college. Ken and I were talking earlier, freshman year, coming from the schools I came from. In general, I did pretty well, but in calculus, I was not doing well. And that freshman, math professor, Professor Oliver, sort of sat me down and wanted to talk about my preparation in math. And he said, well, we can work through this. And he sort of said, well, the calculus book you're using, that's not very good. In high school, it's not a very good textbook, so that's got to be the problem, which in retrospect was him sort of saying, well, it was about the books, it's not you. But he tutored me. And people, they made those kind of investments in my success all along the way. And so I think it's important to invest in others as an individual leader. And I think the best companies really have a very similar outlook on the world.
In both the individual and in business, what's the most important reason to be philanthropic in both?
Well, I think individually, it's ultimately what is most fulfilling. The impact that you're going to have on other lives is going to be the most fulfilling thing that you can do. Everything else sort of fades with time. And you even forget some of the details of what you did. But you do remember the people that you've helped find themselves. I think with companies, it's important if you're going to be an enduring company to think about all of the stakeholders And so certainly companies think about their customers. And at Darden, that's where we started, trying to understand customers and how they behaved and what they needed, what they wanted, whether they expressed it or it was an unexpressed want, trying to dig in and understand that. And then it was certainly about employees, because the only way to deliver for customers was through employees. And in our case, as you said, a couple 100,000 frontline employees. And the only way to deliver through employees is really for them to believe that you've got their best interests in heart. And that starts with getting to know them, what their aspirations are, trying to help them grow personally as well as professionally. And then a big piece of really meeting customer needs and employee needs is helping to develop and advance and meet the challenges of the communities where they live and work. And so I think it's you know, I don't think of that as philanthropy. I think of that as just part of the corporate mission is to do that. I think when you look back at the history of corporate formation in the country, you do see that. You see it with Henry Ford. I mean, Henry Ford, brilliant innovator, flawed like anybody else, but he understood that to build a business, you know, mass producing cars, he needed a public that could afford mass produced cars. And so he invested in the social fabric of the country.
You mentioned one of the things that you enjoy most is helping people realize their dreams, helping them go on career paths and things like that. I heard a saying the other day that said, oftentimes trophies aren't on the shelf. And helping people like that, I think it was something you were known for there. And I think that it's one of the things that probably strengthened the cultural piece of the business more so than we would have otherwise. As you moved about in other places, did you find, how did that stack up? How did that compare?
I think you see that in every truly great company. And so, as I said, every company is a social entity with behavioral norms. Those behavioral norms ultimately form a culture. And so you've got a culture, you've got values embedded in the company. The best companies, the enduring companies, are very intentional about their culture and their values. So they're trying to discern what is the culture of the organization, what are the values that are reflected in our behavior, is that what we want to be? If not, what kind of transformation plan do we need to become what we want to become? And so that was certainly what motivated us at Darden. I think, you know, if I look at JP Morgan, you know, which is the other company I work with, you saw the same thing. And it really was that very purposeful nature of the organization that allowed it to become what it is. Because when I first got to New York in 1980, you had investment banks, Goldman Sachs, First Boston, Morgan Stanley, and you had the commercial banks, First National Citibank, Bankers Trust, Chemical, Manufacturers Hanover, and the commercial banks were all viewed as second tier. And Chemical, where I was, is the organization that said, that really took that very intentional look at itself and decided they could be better than that and could do more. And with that purposefulness around culture and transforming it, Chemical essentially bought Manufacturers Hanover. Right. Then they bought Chase, took the Chase name because that was a more valuable name in the marketplace. They bought JP Morgan and expanded the name to JP Morgan Chase, and on and on. But they were able to have that vision because they were very intentional about culture. And they were able to be attractive to those other organizations because they saw the power of the culture that was underneath that galvanizing bank, Chemical Bank. So I certainly see it there. a very similar sort of story. Verizon is, a combination of a bunch of companies, but it ultimately, it started with New York, New England Telephone, 9X, and then merging with Bell Atlantic and GTE and a whole lot of mobile phone companies, and it's Verizon because it was the one of all of those that really was very purposeful in thinking about what it was, which was average, and what it wanted to be, which was world class.
What does it mean to be a purpose-driven company?
It means a company where you sort of understand that the purpose of the business is bigger than the business. So what is it that we're ultimately trying to achieve beyond the numbers? And so in Darden's case, we always talked about nourishing and delighting everyone we serve. That was the purpose of the organization, that we were uniquely positioned to really take customers to a place where they could engage with one another in a lot of different occasions and have meaningful experiences in our restaurants. And we could take our employees and really help them achieve their dreams and aspirations. And so that was the way we thought about being a purpose-driven organization. So it's working for something larger than yourself. And the same thing holds true for an individual leader. I mean, the best leaders are those who are ambitious for the organization, who are really trying to work in service of something sort of larger than their own self-interest.
You're the lead director for Verizon. 59% of the women and women of color are in the employee base. 6 out of the 10 board members are women or women of color. You spend $50 billion a year with minority vendors, and they have 10 different employee groups. So in your view, does that make a good philanthropic company?
It does. I mean, that's the foundation for it. I think as a result of the diversity that Verizon has in its leadership ranks and in its employee base. And I think the interesting thing about Verizon is 20% of its employee base is black, so not just people of color. The people of color, it starts to rise closer to 40%. And that's true of the overall employee base, but it's also true of the top 300. It's actually the same number, about 20%. With that diversity, you're starting to think about a multiplicity of communities. And so you really are active in a broad range of communities. And when you add that all together, you can have, in Verizon's case, a national impact. So it's not really, despite its size, a global company, because its employee base essentially, with a few exceptions among multinational corporations, is domestic. It's US.
While you were at Darden, Darden's annualized stock return was 14.3%, while the S&P was only 9.5%. The cumulative return was 477% versus the S&P's 234%. That's very strong performance. So on behalf of those of us that own a lot of stock, thank you. But like Verizon, like Darden, like UCF, would you agree the power of big makes excellence possible?
I do agree. I think there are virtues that come with small companies, especially small companies that become big companies. I work with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. They, like every one of the 13 branches, they're all independent. They've got their own economists, and economists in Atlanta were making the case, because you hear a lot about small businesses being the backbone of America, and those economists would modify that and say small businesses that become big businesses are the backbone of America. There are a lot of proprietorships, 2 and 3 person, but the job creation comes from Google and Facebook and Salesforce and Darden and Walmart growing from 10, 15 people to what they are today. And so you really, small business is important, but you really want to identify and nourish those folks whose ambition is to grow and be big businesses. And once you are big, you can have an impact, an outsized impact. There's no question about that when you look at what those businesses are capable of, given the resources that they have. And that's their obligation. Their obligation is to have an outsized impact when you get to that scale.
Yeah, those big businesses, they don't normally get there by accident. They get there because they do something good, or they're really good at something, or they do something. I'm going to take one before I have some more questions, but I want to make sure I get at least one question in from the audience. I don't know if you're here, but don't identify yourself once I tell you. So here's a doozy. As a PhD student in mathematics education at UCF, I'm interested in increasing equitable access to STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, programming, and educational opportunities for students of color. From your experience as an entrepreneur, industrialist, and businessman, what role does STEAM education play in developing people of color to aspire towards entrepreneurship or business and industrial roles? Whew, there's your question.
Yeah.
That's a big idea. It's a great question, by the way. Thank you.
I would say, given the world that we live in, right? And so we're in the middle of, potentially at the very start of, the information age. And so technology, engineering, digital, applied mathematics, data science, all of that is important. It's very difficult to think that you can thrive in the future if you don't have some basic understanding of all of that, the STEM part of it. And I would say the arts part of it is important because arts is about understanding how humans think, behave, and that's always going to be important. So STEAM is certainly important, and to the extent that there is a divide when it comes to getting a strong educational foundation in those areas, that's a problem. And so I do think organizations ought to be thinking about access to a quality education. And a big part of that would be STEAM. And different organizations will have a different take on what their role is. And so at Verizon, for example, the role becomes pretty obvious. It really is affordable connectivity, right? Because Verizon is a connection company. It gets you on the digital highway.
It closes the digital circle.
Yeah, and so, there are some folks where availability is a problem in rural areas. There are other places where access is available, it's just not affordable. And that would be the case in large swaths of the cities. And so Verizon, recognizing its role as a business, their focus is on connecting communities that otherwise wouldn't be connected, with a heavy focus on making sure all schools are connected so those students can really have access. At Darden, our very different organization. And so for us, as you well know, we used to think about it as what we provide is access to a high quality life. And so you can come in as a frontline employee with no particular set of skills and capabilities except a work ethic and a love for people, and you can apply yourself, and we will help you get there. We'll help you develop the skills that you need to begin to progress in our organization to progress in someone else's organization, to go back to school if you want. And so our focus was always on helping people get to that first opportunity, whether that was just to get access to college or to the first job. So a little bit different than the way that Verizon comes at it, because our role in the country is a different role.
I'm glad you bring up access, because access is something that's really important, has been to me, because it was available to me that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. More importantly, it's been important to UCF. Yep. It's been a part of our culture. And I guess I would ask you, are you familiar with other places that have a commitment to access? I know you know a lot about us, about UCF, but in your view, is there a standard out there that we should be reaching for when it comes to access? And what are we willing to do?
Well, I think UCF really sets a standard, and so it's a model. There are other models out there. So the California university system, the University of California component of it is better known. So Berkeley, UCLA, UC Davis. But there's a second level, Cal State LA, Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Haywood. Those are the access points for a broader swath of students than UC Berkeley or UCLA. And they do a good job of really reaching down into historically marginalized communities and giving those students a leg up. And so that's certainly something that's a very big system. So as big as the University of California system is, with Berkeley at however many students they have, in UCLA, they're only, I think they've opened a couple since I was there, but probably 10 or 11 campuses. So less than 500,000 students. Whereas the Cal LA, the Cal State part of that system is multiples of that.
In terms of governance, we now have a state university system of, was it 12, I think, total now, plus 28 former community colleges, now state colleges, with their own football teams. Go figure. When you talk about a feeder system like that, long before we even knew a lot about whether there was going to be state colleges or independents, it was, can we have a direct connect? And the university has a direct connect with 4 or 5 other state colleges where it gives access to students. I worry sometimes that I look at higher education that somehow that we're losing some of that, and I hope we don't. And just as a personal opinion, in your role, because you're a thoughtful guy and you think about these things a lot, and we talk about these things a lot. What role will higher education have in the next decade?
Well, I think
because you're looking at it from both the digital divide and from other things.
Yeah. I think it's going to be critical, and I think fostering even closer partnerships with the private sector, so that there is alignment on what the specific skills are that are required, and that ought to be offered to students as part of it. But I think higher education is not just vocational school.
Right.
And so the work that UCF does to really teach critical thinking and teach students how to understand the world and navigate the world, those are underestimated in the public discourse, where it's all about vocational components of school, which are important and becoming even more important. But ultimately, in higher education, it's that other piece that really makes the American university system unique in the world.
I agree. I'm going to use another student-asked question. This is a really good one, too. If someone had the pleasure of cooking for you, what would you want the meal to be?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I mean, what I would say is...
And he eats a lot, guys. I'm not kidding you.
We are truly restaurant people,
We are.
so we don't do a whole lot of home cooking. So it would be a restaurant chef. Having grown up on the coast and lived much of my life on the coast, whether it's the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, down here, it would be a seafood meal.
Well, it's healthy. It's healthy for sure. More and more we're seeing the role of philanthropy both increasing while at the same time sort of coming under fire. We've seen things like your foundation should spend all their money in 1 year. Mm-hmm. And then you have others that say you should continue to build it and so that it's around for generations. Have you any thoughts about how that should play out?
I think a lot of institutions, philanthropic institutions, have not done as good a job as they need to educating the public about how it all works. And so I think endowments and explaining how endowments work is something schools just have not done a good job of explaining. So I served on the board of my college, so Williams. Williams is a small school, 2,200 students. It's
pretty good school though.
It's well endowed. I forget the number is probably $3 or $4 billion. What they have to help people.
There's a goal.
What they have to help people understand is, you want to maintain the spending power of that endowment over time, because it really funds all the things that people say they want, access, et cetera. So at Williams, 5% of that endowment turns into, $200 million a year.
Right.
And that is half its operating budget. And so without that, this is a school that's needs blind. So they admit students without taking into consideration ability to pay. And 50% of the students are on financial aid. So without the endowment, they can't be needs blind. Without the endowment, those schools look like they looked in the 40s and 50s, where every kid there was wealthy,
Yeah.
And that is not a model that they've taken sufficient time to explain. And other endowed organizations haven't done that as well either.
I've seen some stories that I've read about how it could be as much as 40%, 45% of all colleges and universities in the country will be out of business by the end of the decade. I don't know if that number's true, but if it's even close, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And so what role would businesses have in that kind of a disruption?
Well, I think even without that kind of disruption, businesses have to step up and help colleges and universities train students. So students come to you, they have certain skills that the colleges and universities can provide. They have critical thinking skills. But ultimately, you have to help them get to the point where they can contribute to your business. No matter how tailored the partnership is with the school, you have a responsibility to train and develop people. And so businesses have to invest in training and developing their people. They will lose some of those people to other businesses. That's okay, that's part of it. But that's an obligation that businesses have that they can't delegate, because ultimately that sort of last mile of customization is on a business to provide.
Do companies like Verizon train toward that somehow, within anticipating that one day they would be international and beyond where they are now? Or
yes, I think the sort of training and development programs, though, are sort of immature compared to where they need to be eventually. And so, Darden was always an interesting model. We take for our restaurant managers, the 4 people that will manage any particular unit. So 3 assistant managers, 1 general manager. Those assistant managers are sourced a lot of different ways. Some of them are recruited right off college campuses. More than half, probably about half, are hourly employees who've raised their hand and said they want to go into management. And then we spend really half a year training those people to become managers, right? And how to do all the budgeting for their unit and scheduling and training and orientation. And that is a level of training that I don't see a lot of places. Yeah.
You may not know this, I don't know if it was in the bio or not, but Clarence is on the board of Lincoln Center in New York. That's a pretty significant institution in America, not just in New York. What was attractive to you about that? What do you like and where are you going with it?
Well, I started with one of the constituent organizations. So Lincoln Center is made up of several different organizations. So there's the Metropolitan Opera, there's the New York Philharmonic, the American Ballet Theater, the New York Ballet, Jazz at Lincoln Center. And so I started with Jazz at Lincoln Center, and that really is because that's an art form that I've always liked and enjoyed, and they are ultimately the best jazz organization in the world, and run by Wynton Marsalis, who is an incredible performer, really born for that. His father is one of the legendary jazz teachers, Ellis Marsalis. And so I started with that, and then as part of Jazz at Lincoln Center began to understand a little bit more about the overall Lincoln Center mission, and so I'm on both boards now. But it's ultimately an organization that's committed to excellence. And so because it's New York, with all of the ability that New York has to attract creative talent, performing arts, creative talent from around the country, from around the world, each of those constituent organizations feels like their mission is to be the highest expression of that art form in the world. They aren't all the very best in the world at what they do, but they're all in the conversation about being the best in the world. And so that pursuit of excellence is something that they're positioned to pursue. And they've done a wonderful job of it. And they can do it across all of those art forms. Most cities just aren't resourced to do that in terms of the people resources. So even I grew up in Los Angeles, the LA Philharmonic is spectacular. You know, LA's opera, the ballet company are not going to compete with New York's.
Another tell-all moment, and he'll be embarrassed, but it'll be great. In an interview many years ago, I found this. He was asked the question, what would you do if you weren't a business leader, CEO of Darden? And his answer was surprising. He would like to be an actor. Is that still true?
Well, I think I've aged out on that. But, I mean, we grew up, as I said, in a creative community. And so down the street from the Watchtowers, down the street from the Watchtowers Art Center, and in addition to the visual artists, and the executive directors were both, as I said, renowned painters, art makers. They had a theater program, and so I was involved in theater from the beginning. My sister went to college with me. We were part of a theater troupe in college. I did theater in law school. So yeah, it was something I did for a long, long time.
I thought it was great. I think you'd be good at it. You're working today. Last couple of questions. Humility is the power to change. And if that's true, what do we need to change first?
Well, I think the public discourse in the country could stand a dose of humility. Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's we've gotten to the point where people are they're very proud of their opinions, and if you get to a point where you're a person whose mind is never changed, then you've got a problem. I mean, because there are things that you believe that with additional information and experience, you ought to change your mind, decide, I was wrong about that. That never happens anymore in public discourse. So that is I think, a indicator that there's less humility than there ought to be, especially in this era where, knowledge is accelerating. I mean, there are more and more things being discovered that we didn't know.
Right.
And so you see it even with the debate about the vaccine. Well, this one, it was so quick. And you're like, well, it's quick because they found a different pathway that is a unbelievable medical breakthrough. Beyond this vaccine to fighting disease generally. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it is. I mean, you don't want, Civil War level medicine.
Right. Hope not. Hope not. One of the things that happens as we go out and participate in that discourse, I think it was McGeorge Bundy, I'm not sure,
mm-hmm.
but I think he said something to the effect that if every 10 years or so you ought to pinch yourself and see it change your mind, and if you haven't, you may want to pinch yourself because you may be dead. So every once in a while, having to pinch yourself is probably a good idea for a lot of the folks with all those opinions that are out there. Let me give you and give this a good thought.
Uh-huh.
What advice would you tell your younger self?
It probably is universal, but it really is that you need to be more patient and let things play out. That it's, as a younger person, you can be overly quick to make a change, whether that's a change in where you live, a change in job, and taking a little more time sometimes is a good thing. It'll avoid a lot of churn where you make a lot of changes, but you haven't gotten any place different.
I did forget one other question. Would you like to tell everybody about, you do have somebody that's in showbiz in your family, recently debuted on the Colbert Show.
Yeah, that's we have 3 children. Oldest son, twins, boy and girl. Our youngest son is a comedian. So he writes for The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. So he's a writer for Trevor. And he does stand-up. And he does stand-up really around the country, but largely in New York City. And in June, you're right, he was on The Daily Show.
That's pretty cool.
Yep. And people always ask, has he always been funny? And the answer is yes. He actually has always been funny. Even when he was 7, 8 years old, he was funny in situations that weren't funny.
or at least mom and dad didn't think they were that funny. Got that. Well, I hope that you will spend as much time as possible in our community, because you live here, and have other places and are gone around. But we really want to thank you for what you and Jackie have done for this community and other communities that you've been in. And let's give Clarence a round of applause for this.
Thank you.
To our members in the audience, thank you for coming. This is you can say you're at the inaugural event, and we're looking forward to this growing into a very special event year after year. As a reminder, Alex told you about the Crossroads intersection of business and philanthropy next year in November. Please put it on your calendar. We hope to see you then. And I think we want to thank Dr. Phillips, but Ken, I think you want to come up. Can you come up one more time? Let's thank Dr. Phillips for their sponsorship of this.
Let's get the microphone. I think, we're excited about Clarence being our first speaker, and you can see exactly why. I mean, really and truly a wonderful man inside, and what he's giving back to the community and the business world is just tremendous. And to prove how smart he is, he is very committed to the Boys and Girls Clubs. And he and his wife made a very substantial commitment in Lift Orlando to create a new Boys and Girls Club that is world-class. It might be the best in the country at
Yep.
this point in time. But he is so smart, he named it the Jacqueline Bradley.
And you're going to get a lecture when you get home.
If I ever. There's 3. She's got a list of 3 now.
There it is, okay.
So in our way of saying thank you, we are going to make a donation at Dr. Phillips Charities of $20,000 to that boy's.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
2 little pieces of cleanup for me. One is our chairman, Jim Ferber, wanted me to say thank you to all of y'all on his behalf. He's over in St. Petersburg and unfortunately suffered a fairly significant accident to both knees at one time. And so he is not bedridden anymore, but he's not traveling yet. So thank you on behalf of our chairman, Jim Ferber. And we've got one of our officers in the corporation, Eva Tekdarian. Eva sits on the foundation and is a double graduate of UCF. So Eva, thank you for what you do. I will close with that and say thank you to all of you. Rick, thank you so much. Clarence, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, man.
That was fun.
Yeah, thank you.